this is the result. This is where you will end up. With your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison.
I'll see you all in hell, too. You remember that. Every I'll see you in hell.
When you choose to pally yourself with the devil, what would you expect? Well, the price to be paid can be nothing short of hell. In this video, we will explore the reactions of ruthless cartel members as they received their life sentences and confronted a fate that truly matched the gravity of their crimes. From the heartless human scavenger to the world-renowned prison escapee, get ready to witness a haunting symphony of justice unfold before your eyes. George Gaywil Thomas. George Gaywil Thomas is a man who recently received not 1, not 2, but 7 life sentences. Now, you might be thinking, who is this guy? Well, hold on tight because it's quite a tale. George wasn't your average cartel member or drug lord. He was actually the leader of the 28 gang, which is part of the notorious Numbers gang. This gang started as a prison group in South Africa, but soon spread throughout the country and formed different factions. The 28s, known as the bloodline of the gang, were responsible for carrying out brutal killings and executions of rival gang members to prove their loyalty. To become a member of the 28s, you had to show a certain level of brutality towards victims. If you didn't make the cut, you were placed in the lowest faction of the gang, where you'd be subjected to mistreatment until you toughened up. As you can imagine, George must have been a truly brutal individual to rise to the top of such a deadly group. He and his men didn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. They operated mainly in Western Cape Town, where George was eventually arrested. He faced a whopping 55 charges, including 7 counts of murder. He was put in solitary confinement, but even there, it's said that he managed to receive over 33,000 phone calls, continuing to order the executions of rival gang members. One of his victims was Curtis Esther Husson, whom the 28s tried to kill 6 times but failed. Curtis was set to testify against George and his crew, and George wanted to silence them all. You see, his lawyer was trying to paint him as an upright citizen with a clean bank account and a fish-selling business. But the judge saw through the lies and handed George 7 life sentences, 1 for each first-degree murder charge. Now, you might expect George to be shaken by this, but the guy seemed unfazed. Just look at his reaction, like one who has been promised a role in a sci-fi movie. He had an air of indifference. However, after spending a few years in prison, something changed. He realized that maybe he wouldn't be where he is now if he had made different choices. The harsh reality of prison life finally caught up with him, and he had a change of heart. Jeremy Joseph Christian. Next up is the story of Jeremy Joseph Christian, a man involved in a terrible hate crime that took place in Portland, Oregon, back in May 2017. It all happened on a commuter train where Christian committed a horrifying act. He attacked 3 men, stabbing them with a knife. Tragically, 2 of the men died from their injuries, while the 3rd was fortunate enough to survive. The incident unfolded when Christian began spewing racist and hateful remarks directed at 2 teenage girls on the train. One of the girls was African American, and the other was a Muslim who wore a hijab. The victims, brave and compassionate individuals, stood up to defend the girls from Christian's vile words. Christian's actions were driven by his extreme beliefs and deep-rooted racism. It wasn't the first time he had displayed such behavior, as witnesses had previously heard him shouting racist slurs and making derogatory comments. His words were filled with venom and intolerance. Law enforcement swiftly apprehended Christian after the attack. He faced several charges, including aggravated murder and attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with witnesses providing accounts of his hateful outbursts. During his arrest, Christian didn't show any remorse for what he had done. In fact, he made disturbing statements, proudly admitting to the violence he had inflicted. It was a chilling confirmation of the hate that fueled his actions. The case sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. People were outraged by the senseless loss of life and the blatant display of bigotry. The incident served as a stark reminder that hate crimes persist in our society and that we must actively work to combat them. In June 2019, Christian faced trial and was found guilty on all charges. The court recognized the severity of his crimes and the pain he had caused to the victims' families. In February 2020, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized the need for justice and condemned Christian's actions in the strongest terms. The story of Jeremy Christian is a tragic one, reminding us of the devastating consequences of hate and extremism. Marciano Milan Vasquez. Marciano Milan Vasquez, also known as Chano, was a ruthless member of a dangerous drug cartel called Los Zetas. This cartel is notorious for its brutal and violent acts, which includes kidnapping, assassinations, torture, beheadings, and even senseless murders. The former leader of the cartel was nicknamed El Verdugo, meaning the executioner, due to his brutal methods of killing, such as feeding victims to lions and tigers on his ranch. Vasquez seemed to have learned this brutal form of execution as he was involved in dumping victims into barrels of boiling oil or cutting out their hearts. Besides drug trafficking, the Los Zetas cartel also ran sex and gun rackets, and Vasquez operated within this cartel. Given his affiliation, one can only imagine the level of brutality he engaged in. At the age of 34, Vasquez served as a hired killer or sicario, engaging in drug trafficking and acting as a well-known weapons distributor. He oversaw the Piedras Negras Plaza for the Los Zetas cartel, responsibly for smuggling narcotics into the United States through a corridor near Eagle Pass, Texas. The Los Zetas ensured their control over law enforcement and regional officials by bribing or threatening them. There were even allegations of millions of dollars in cash being paid to officials in the Mexican state of Coahuila, including previous and current governors. Being in such a line of work, it was no surprise that Vasquez was ruthless. He brutally murdered anyone who stood in his way, showing no mercy regardless of who they were. What was even more horrifying was that he extended his cruelty to the loved ones of his victims. Between January 2009 and July 2015, Vasquez was responsible for the killing of at least 29 people in northern Mexico. One particular massacre, known as the Allende Massacre, took place on March 18, 2011. Vasquez and other members of Los Zetas stormed the quiet ranching town of Allende, just a short drive from Eagle Pass, Texas. This brutal attack resulted from a U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) agent persuading a high-level Zetas operative to act as an informant. When the DEA informed Mexican federal police, the Trevino brothers, high-ranking members of Los Zetas retaliated by targeting the informants and anyone connected to them. Vasquez participated in this massacre, resulting in the killing and abduction of at least 300 people, including innocent individuals like Gerardo Heath and Edgar Avila. Vasquez's actions were horrifyingly cruel. He even murdered a 6-year-old girl in front of her parents, dismembering her with an axe and burning her body. He taunted the parents while they helplessly watched. Vasquez wanted to teach a lesson to the father and other witnesses by committing this horrific act. Finally, in 2015, Vasquez was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, where he had been living under a false name. At his trial, overwhelming evidence was presented against him, including the testimony of Gustavo Rodriguez, another Los Zetas member who witnessed numerous executions in Piedras Negras. Vasquez was sentenced to 7 consecutive life imprisonment sentences for his involvement in multiple murders, acts of violence, drug trafficking, and weapons distribution. Despite the lack of cameras or cell phones allowed in the courtroom, the images that emerged showed Vasquez with his head bowed, appearing rather mournful. Now he feels the hot hand of karma and will forever trapped in this web till the end of his days. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was one of the few men who started trading narcotics in Mexico. He was born on January 8, 1946, and grew up in Bella Vista. Unlike other drug dealers, he didn't grow up in extreme poverty. He went to high school and then attended college, where he studied business. After college, he joined the Mexican Federal Judicial Police and later became the personal bodyguard for Sinaloa's governor, Leopoldo Sanchez Elise. During this time, he made connections with influential politicians. In the 1980s, Felix Gallardo made a bold move. He took over the operations of his mentor, Pedro Aviles Perez, and formed the Guadalajara Cartel. This was no small feat, as he managed to unite rival drug traffickers with the help of the Mexico's intelligence agency. What made Felix Gallardo stand out was that he became the first Mexican trafficker to smuggle cocaine for the powerful Colombian cartels. The money started pouring in, and he used it to his advantage. He corrupted influential figures in Mexico, including the defense minister, gaining immense power and protection. However, Felix Gallardo's empire took a dark turn in 1985. He framed his closest friend, Rafael Caro Quintero, and his partner, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, for the murder of a Drug Enforcement Administration DEA agent named Enrique Camarena Salazar. This shocking act sparked outrage, not just in Mexico but also in the United States. Fearing betrayal from within, Felix Gallardo ruled his cartel with an iron fist. He started a war with the Gulf Cartel and found himself in a tense standoff with the Cali Cartel due to unpaid debts. These conflicts fractured his organization, causing it to split into smaller factions. This fragmentation set the stage for what would become the violent and deadly Mexican drug war. He worked closely with Colombian cartels to import narcotics into Mexico. At its peak, the Guadalajara cartel was making around $5 billion annually. However, their problems began when the DEA agent Camarena gathered information about the cartel's marijuana plantations and the involvement of low-level politicians in the drug trade. Camarena shared his findings with the Mexican federal government, which led to a raid on Gallardo's plantation. This made Gallardo furious. On February 7, 1985, he ordered the kidnapping of Camarena and his helicopter pilot as they were leaving the United States Consulate General in Guadalajara. They were taken to a remote location where they endured 30 hours of torture. Unfortunately, both Camarena and his pilot were killed. Their bodies were later found by Mexican authorities. The death of Camarena and his pilot sparked outrage in the United States, and the United States government demanded that the Mexican government arrest everyone involved. However, Gallardo had corrupt officials on his payroll, making it difficult to bring him to justice. Under intense pressure, the Mexican government eventually had to arrest him. He was apprehended at his house in Guadalajara while still wearing his bathrobe. Interestingly, he didn't resist or use any weapons during the arrest. Gallardo was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his crimes. However, on September 2022, he was granted house arrest. Abal Galos. Prepare yourself for an unbelievable tale about Abal Galos, a man whose actions led to a lifetime behind bars. Back in 2018, a mother named Simone Duran, with 2 daughters to care for, connected with a 36-year-old guy on social media who went by the name Abal Galos. They struck up a conversation and eventually decided to meet in person at a house in Denver, along with another man named Rene Francisco Rosales and a few others. The exact reason why Duran chose to meet up with these individuals remains unknown, but it turned out to be a decision she would deeply regret. After spending some time together in the house, Duran, Gallegos, and Rosales left the premises. However, Rosales took a different route to his home, leaving Duran alone with Gallegos. Unbeknownst to Duran, Gallegos had arranged to meet another member of his gang, simply identified as Quintana, at a parking lot on Koufax and Kipling. Here's where the story takes a horrifying turn. Gallegos and Quintana launched a vicious assault on Duran before forcing her into the back of a car. They then drove her to a dark and secluded spot nearby. Once they arrived, they pulled Duran out of the vehicle, ruthlessly shooting her 10 times, leaving her lifeless body lying in a pool of her own blood. To make matters even more twisted, Gallegos and Quintana returned to the scene to pour gasoline on Duran's body and set it ablaze, reducing it to ashes. Now, the shocking part is that Gallegos was arrested on November 20th, 2018 for an unrelated crime. However, investigators later connected him to Duran's murder. Adding to this heinous act, Gallegos was on federal probation at the time, and his probation had been revoked 8 times previously. It was his 6th felony conviction. This guy was a true monster, and the judge didn't hold back when expressing his disgust. He remarked, "I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life." Recognizing the danger Gallegos posed to society, the judge handed down his sentence, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Just imagine the scene as Gallegos is led out of the courtroom with his family and friends in tears, knowing that he will never see freedom again. Let's talk about the Sinaloa Cartel. At the helm of this criminal organization was Guzman Loera, masked in deep tattoos, seated before the court with his products. But what are they? Well, the Sinaloa Cartel's reach extended across international borders, with its primary focus on distributing drugs to the United States. Operating primarily in Mexican states like Sinaloa, Sonora, Durango, and Baja California, the Sinaloa Cartel had a presence in various other regions within Mexico. Their main trade involved smuggling large quantities of cocaine from South America, passing through Central America, and into Mexico. However, their criminal activities were not restricted to cocaine alone. Guzman Loera was also heavily involved in the production, transportation, and distribution of methamphetamine and heroin. But when their leader comes face to face with the law, his reactions are better witnessed than described. Do you think the law gave them the full chunks of their deserved meals? Tell us what you think in the comment section. El Chapo. How dangerous can the fall of a mighty be? Well, the story of this man paints a very clear picture. El Chapo once held the power of life and death in his hands. Responsible for over 1,000 deaths, he now finds tears streaming down his face as the reality sinks in. He will spend the rest of his days locked away in a United States prison. El Chapo, Mexico's answer to Pablo Escobar, was not just a drug lord, but the mastermind behind the most sophisticated drug cartel in the country, the infamous Sinaloa Cartel. Let's rewind to El Chapo's early days. Born in abject poverty on April 4th, 1957, he endured a turbulent childhood. His father, a cattle rancher by day and a drug dealer by night, subjected him to abuse. In a twist of irony, El Chapo's father involved him in the marijuana trade, only to squander the profits on everything except his family. Determined to support his mother and brother, El Chapo, along with a few cousins, took matters into their own hands. They decided to cultivate their own marijuana plantation. But fate had a different plan for El Chapo. His father, for reasons unknown, expelled him from their home, thrusting him into the treacherous world of narcotics. El Chapo found himself working for the Guadalajara cartel, overseeing their drug shipments. What set him apart was his zero-tolerance policy for mistakes. If a shipment was delayed or encountered any issues, El Chapo would personally execute the sicario responsible. This ruthless approach caught the attention of Felix Gallardo, one of Mexico's most influential drug lords at the time. After Gallardo's arrest, El Chapo saw an opportunity. Back in 1989, after taking over some of his former boss's territory, Guzman decided to start his own cartel, Sinaloa. Little did he know, this would eventually make him one of Mexico's most feared and influential drug traffickers, catching the attention of the DEA and FBI in the early 1990s. During that time, the Colombian drug cartels like Medellin and Cali were losing their grip on power. And guess who stepped in to fill the void? That's right, Sinaloa and Guzman himself. Under his leadership, Sinaloa took control of the cocaine trade, stretching all the way from South America to the United States. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Sinaloa became known for its clever smuggling methods. They built a network of air-conditioned tunnels that snaked beneath the Mexican-US border, allowing them to transport drugs discreetly. And get this, they even hid cocaine inside fire extinguishers and cans labeled as chili peppers. The impact of Guzman's operations didn't go unnoticed. Art Bilek, the executive vice president of the Chicago Crime Commission, compared Guzman to the infamous Al Capone. He said, "What Al Capone was to beer and whiskey during Prohibition, Guzman is to narcotics." And he didn't stop there. Bilek emphasized that Guzman posed an even greater threat than Capone ever did, with more power and financial resources than Capone could have ever imagined. But it wasn't just cocaine that Sinaloa dabbled in. They also trafficked heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine, spreading their influence not only in the U.S., but across 5 continents. Their reach expanded to become the largest drug operation in the entire world. What made El Chapo truly remarkable was his innovation. He pioneered the use of underground tunnels to transport a significant portion of his illicit goods. As his empire grew, so did his notoriety. He became the most wanted man in Mexico. Although he was captured twice before, El Chapo managed to slip through the prison walls, making him one of the most notorious prison escapees. However, fate finally caught up with him. In 2016, after his 3rd arrest, El Chapo was extradited to the United States. Now, he resides in the impenetrable walls of the ADX Florence, serving multiple life sentences and never seeing the outside world. On February 12, 2019, after a lengthy trial that involved over 200 hours of testimony from 56 witnesses, El Chapo faced the verdict. He was found guilty on all 10 counts against him. These charges included serious offenses like engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to launder narcotics proceeds, and the use of firearms. The evidence presented in court was compelling, and the jury made their decision based on the facts and testimonies presented. Fast forward to July 17, 2019, when Judge Kogan delivered the sentence. It was a moment that would change El Chapo's life forever. The judge pronounced a sentence of life in prison plus an additional 30 years. That's a significant punishment, ensuring that El Chapo would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Jorge Eduardo Costilla. Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez, a drug lord who may not be as well known as others but was just as ruthless. Born on August 1, 1971, in the state of Tamaulipas, Mexico, Costilla had a humble beginning as a regular municipal worker. However, he soon found himself drawn into the world of drugs through some friends. In the late 1990s, Costilla became friends with the leader of the Gulf Cartel, Osiel Cardenas Guillen. Under Cardenas's influence, Costilla rose through the ranks and became a high-ranking member of the cartel. Known for his enthusiasm for violence, Costilla played a significant role in the cartel's drug trafficking operations. During their pursuit of success in the drug trade, Costilla and Cardenas encountered 2 DEA agents who had infiltrated their territory to monitor the cartel's activities. While they initially considered killing the agents, they realized the severe consequences of harming United States citizens and federal agents. As a result, they spared their lives. However, Cardenas was later arrested on March 14, 2003, during a shootout with Mexican armed forces, which shifted the power within the cartel to Costilla. Costilla then formed partnerships with Cardenas's brother and other drug lords to maintain control over the Gulf cartel. However, their constant power, struggles, and disagreements turned the cartel into a violent civil war. This internal conflict led to the emergence of the Zetas, a notorious paramilitary group that broke away from the Gulf Cartel and sparked one of the bloodiest wars in Mexican history. Eventually, the law caught up with Costilla. On September 12, 2012, he was arrested in a small neighborhood in Tampico. Surprisingly, he offered no resistance during his arrest, almost as if he anticipated it. Before his arrest, very few people knew who he was or what he looked like, as only 2 of his photos were publicly available. In 2015, Costilla was extradited to the United States, where he was handed a life sentence. This undoubtedly left him with a sense of regret for the choices he made and the violent path he followed. Despite not being widely recognized, Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez's story serves as a reminder of the dark and destructive world of drug trafficking. Pedro Espinosa. Pedro was sentenced to death within the confines of California State Prison at San Quentin. The video you witnessed captured his emotionless facial expression, a common sight among 18th Street gang members upon receiving their court sentences. Pedro Espinosa's victim was Jamil Andre Shaw II, a talented high school athlete who attended Los Angeles High School. Jamil excelled in football, basketball, baseball, piano, and track. He was a remarkable individual with a promising future, supported every step of the way by his parents. It is worth noting that his mother, Anita Shaw, was serving her second tour in Iraq at the time of his tragic death. Pedro Espinosa, born in 1989, was an illegal immigrant to the United States. His first encounter with the law occurred in 2007 when he was arrested on charges of possessing a firearm and assaulting a police officer. However, the most significant mistake made was granting Espinosa an early release from jail, reducing his sentence by 4 months. This decision was made despite law enforcement being aware of his illegal immigration status, which may seem perplexing and troubling. On the evening of March 2, 2008, at around 8:40 p.m., 2 Hispanic men, including Pedro Espinosa, emerged from a white car and confronted Shaw. They inquired about his gang affiliation, assuming he belonged to the rival Bloods gang due to his Spider-Man backpack, which they associated with the color red. Shaw, taken aback by the confrontation, was unable to respond and was tragically shot on the spot. Shaw's father, who heard the gunshot from their home, called his son to warn him about the area. Unaware that the victim was his own son since Jamil did not answer his phone, the father rushed outside and discovered him. He stayed by his side until medical personnel arrived. Jamil was then transported to a hospital but was pronounced dead at 9:55 p.m. As for Espinosa, this senseless murder occurred on his first day out of prison. Consequently, it didn't take long for him to be recaptured and subsequently charged with first-degree murder. After 4 years of legal proceedings, on May 23, 2012, Espinosa was sentenced to death. The court ordered that he be executed within the walls of California State Prison at San Quentin by the law and at a date determined by the court in an execution warrant. But you'll think that this guy would be remorseful. Oh no, he was seen with grins all over his face as though nothing happened. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. This is the intriguing story of Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, a key figure in the cocaine market following the demise of Pablo Escobar in 1993. Known as Mr. Orejuela or El Ajedrecista, the chess player, Gilberto was a Colombian drug lord and co-founder of the infamous Cali Cartel. While Pablo Escobar was still alive, the Cali Cartel and the Medellin Cartel were fierce rivals, vying for dominance in the drug trade. However, after Escobar's death, the Cali Cartel seized the opportunity to expand its influence, taking over its territories and absorbing some of its resources. They even forced Escobar's family to leave Colombia due to the threats they posed. At its height, the Cali Cartel controlled a staggering 80% of the cocaine shipped into the United States and 90% into the European market. Yet their reign was short-lived. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela's arrest on June 9, 1995, marked a significant blow to the Cali Cartel. Colombian law enforcement apprehended him during a raid on a house in Cali. Although he had managed to hide in a secret compartment within a bathroom cabinet equipped with an oxygen tank, during a previous search, he was eventually captured. Gilberto received a 15-year prison sentence, of which he served only 7 years. Some speculate that his connections or a stroke of luck played a role in his early release. However, fate caught up with him when Colombian authorities recaptured Gilberto in Cali in 2004. He was swiftly extradited to the United States, where he faced charges of conspiring to import cocaine. Gilberto was subsequently sentenced to 30 years in prison. While there is no official footage of his court proceedings, one could infer from his reaction after extradition that he carried the weight of regret. Imprisoned, Gilberto submitted several applications for early release, citing numerous chronic illnesses, including cancer. However, his pleas were rejected. Federal District Judge Federico Moreno, who denied his applications, emphasized the gravity of Gilberto's offenses and the need to uphold public respect for the law. Despite his criminal record, there was no possibility of effectively halving his sentence. In the end, Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela passed away at the age of 83 in a medical center at Butner, North Carolina, on May 31, 2022. His death marked the conclusion of a dramatic life that had seen him rise to power, experience imprisonment, and grapple with the consequences of his actions. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.